When historians argue about whether something counts as a revolution, they are usually arguing about a very old event. But every so often, the history they are debating turns out to be happening right now. That is the situation I found myself in this week, sitting with two books written about the early modern period that kept describing my own life back to me. The two books under consideration are Elizabeth Eisenstein's The Printing Revolution in Early Modern Europe, second edition from 2005, and Adrian Johns's The Nature of the Book, Print and Knowledge in the Making from 1998. Though I'm reading Eisenstein's revised edition, Johns's work was written as a direct response to her original argument. The two scholars are engaged in a celebrated dispute, and the question at its center is deceptively simple. Did the invention of the printing press constitute a revolution? And if so, what kind of revolution? Eisenstein says yes, emphatically. Johns says the question is more complicated than that. I find myself persuaded by Eisenstein's core argument while thinking that Johns catches something real that she underestimates. But what surprised me most about reading both of them was how much they were describing the present without knowing it. Let me explain what is actually at stake in their debates before I get to that. Before Gutenberg, books were copied by hand. A scribe sat down with an exemplar and reproduced it letter by letter, day after day. The process was slow, expensive, and prone to error. Each copy drifted from its source. A scholar who wanted to consult a text often depended on a single manuscript held in a single location. When that manuscript was burned, the text went with it. Thomas Jefferson understood this better than most. He wrote with something close to grief about the legal records of Virginia that had been lost because they existed in single manuscript copies held in private hands. If those documents had been printed and dispersed across many locations, he argued, at least some copies would have survived the fires and floods and negligence that claimed the rest. Jefferson was not making an abstract point. He was describing a structural vulnerability in scribal culture that printing had, in his lifetime, largely resolved. Eisenstein's central argument builds on that insight. When Gutenberg's press began operating in the 1450s and printing shops spread rapidly across European cities in the decades that followed, the number of books in circulation increased in a way that had no precedent. Eisenstein cites Michael Clapham, quote, "A man born in 1453, the year of the fall of Constantinople, could look back from his 50th year on a lifetime in which about 8 million books had been printed. More perhaps than all the scribes of Europe had produced since Constantine founded his city in AD 330. End quote. That is not a claim that can be argued away by pointing to bad editions of Shakespeare. It describes a structural transformation in how knowledge was stored, transmitted, and accumulated. The effects went beyond quantity. When scholars across Europe could work from the same printed edition of a text, correspondence became possible in a new way. A reader in Krakow and a reader in Lisbon could argue about the same passage on the same page with the same numbering. The dispersal of a single text to many readers, who then sent corrections, observations, and counter-arguments back to editors and publishers, created a new mode of collaborative knowledge building. Eisenstein describes how the fallout from Ortelius's Atlas editions spawned topographical and local history studies ranging from Muscovy to Wales, and how Mattioli's botanical commentaries on Dioscorides, republished in successive editions from 1554 onward, were periodically revised on the basis of specimens and information received from correspondence, a network through which the horse chestnut, the lilac, and the tulip passed from Turkey into European botanical gardens. These were not local transactions. They were the products of a far-flung book trade that printing had made possible. Printing also changed how people read. In the scribal era, reading was largely a communal and oral activity. A scholar read aloud, often within a group, and knowledge passed through spoken transmission alongside the written word. The proliferation of cheap, Privately owned books gradually produce something different. A reader alone with a text, processing it silently, in a mode we now take entirely for granted. The mentor as the primary source of learning gave way, at least in part, to the accumulated library, the habit of thought that library culture produces, where one reads across many sources, compares them, and forms independent judgments, is not natural. It's a product of a specific technology, and printing created the conditions for it. Adrian Johns pushes back on the triumphalist version of this story, and he's not entirely wrong to do so. His most powerful contribution is the demonstration that the press did not automatically produce reliable knowledge. Printing multiplied errors just as it multiplied text. His example of Galileo's Sidereus Nuncius is memorable. The lunar illustrations in the original were degraded, reversed, and reproduced in corrupted form by successive unauthorized editions, and those errors traveled across Europe for decades. Bad printing compounded bad printing, much as bad scribal copying had compounded itself before it. Johns also shows that early readers did not simply trust what was printed. Printers had reputations. The quality of their editing, the care they put into their illustrations, the reliability of their corrections were all known within communities of readers and scholars. A press that employed rigorous correctors and invested in skilled illustrators was trusted differently from one that rushed text to the market in shoddy editions. Trust was earned, not assumed. That point is important, and I'll come back to it. But Eisenstein's response to Johns in a 2002 forum in the American Historical Review seems to me correct. She had never claimed that printing eliminated error or automatically conferred accuracy. Her argument was that printing transcended the structural limits of scribal transmission when practiced competently, and that even its imperfect products created conditions for knowledge to accumulate, be corrected, and persist in ways that hand copying could not. The existence of bad printed editions does not refute the revolution. It is a part of the revolution's texture. Now here's where Eisenstein becomes unexpectedly contemporary, and where I started laughing when reading her book in 2026. Near the end of the printing revolution, she reflects on what the mass reproduction of images had made possible. Reproductions of paintings, illuminated manuscripts, and architectural details could now appear in books, giving readers visual access to objects they would never be able to see in person. She calls this a museum without walls. The phrase captures something real. The printing press had democratized visual knowledge in a way that would have been unimaginable in the scribal era. That is, incidentally, part of what I try to do on this channel. When I show you photographs of the interior of a church in Burgos, or the carved stucco of an Andalusi palace through video with a voiceover recording, I'm operating in an even more technologically advanced tradition than the print culture Eisenstein is describing. But on the same pages, Eisenstein wrote with evident fascination about the emergence of commercial copy centers near university campuses in the early 2000s, which she compared to the stationer's stalls that had supplied medieval universities. She then predicted that professors, armed with word processors, would soon bypass their publishers altogether and distribute their own books directly from their institutions. This did not happen. It was a significant miss. What actually happened was the opposite. The internet intensified the prestige economy of academic publishing rather than dissolving it. Peer review, institutional imprints, and journal rankings became, if anything, more consequential in a world where anyone could self-publish. The gatekeepers were not circumvented. They were, in many respects, entrenched. But something else happened that Eisenstein did not anticipate, and it is the thing that makes her phrase, museum without walls, ring differently today than she intended it. We now have what I would call museums without curators. Anyone can pick up a phone, film themselves standing in front of a building, and tell you what it means. With the right aesthetic, the right music in the background, and the right algorithm, They might reach a larger audience than most tenured professors will reach in a lifetime. There is no peer review process for an Instagram reel. There is no correction mechanism unless someone in the comments has both the expertise and the patience to push back. I see this constantly in my own field. A page with a handle like Medieval Arab History and 12,000 followers can spend years commenting on posts that every horseshoe arch in medieval Iberia is a proof of Arab authorship, erasing centuries of complex cultural exchange, political entanglement, and artistic synthesis in favor for a clean nationalist story. The page looks authoritative. The photos are sharp. The captions are confident. For someone who genuinely wants to learn about this period, it is actively misleading, and it is getting more views than scholars who have spent careers working through the actual evidence. This is not entirely new. John's early modern printers had reputations too, and those reputations were contested. Certain printers produced work for specific communities, fulfilled specific demands, and operated with specific agendas. The Jesuit, who reportedly tried to spy on a rival's print shop to get ahead on an upcoming rebuttal, was navigating exactly the kind of information economy we navigate today, where speed, positioning, and audience matter alongside accuracy. The dynamics are recognizable. The scale is not. There's one more thing Eisenstein could not have foreseen, and it connects directly to Jefferson's lament about lost manuscripts. Jefferson grieved for what fire and time and neglect had taken before printing existed to preserve it. Printing was the great safeguard. Multiply copies, disperse them, and everything will survive. That logic held for 500 years. It does not hold as cleanly now. The file on your computer will disappear when your hard drive fails. The article behind a paywall will become inaccessible when the subscription lapses or the server goes dark. The link that pointed to a source 2 years ago now returns with a 404 error. Digital content does not decay slowly the way paper does. It disappears all at once, without warning, and without leaving a physical remnant. Preservation in the digital age requires the same thing it always required: intentional copying and redistribution. The logic is identical to what Eisenstein described. If it is not actively moved, duplicated, and maintained, it will be lost. The difference is that the interval between creation and loss has compressed dramatically. We produce incomparably more, and we lose it faster. My advisor began his graduate training on a typewriter. Since high school, I have done mine on a laptop. We are separated by decades, not centuries, yet the methods by which we learned, researched, and wrote are fundamentally different. He sifted through physical card catalogs and felt the texture of archival paper. I navigated digitalized finding aids and download PDFs with a single click. The way I interact with primary sources, the way I take notes, the way I draft and revise, the way I share my work, none of it resembles what he did as a student. That is an extraordinary change within a single scholarly generation. Eisenstein argued that the printing press changed not just what people knew, but how they thought, how they processed information, how they formed independent judgment, how they conceived of knowledge as something that could accumulate, be corrected, and be transmitted across generations. Her claim is strongest when read as an account of a specific historical configuration, not a universal law. Printing mattered in 15th century Europe because of the specific institutional crises, confessional conflicts, and scholarly cultures it intersected with. China and Korea had print centuries before Gutenberg without producing the same transformation. The technology alone does not explain the revolution. The technology meeting a particular historical moment does. We are clearly in a period of transformation. How it will settle, what will persist, what will be lost, we do not know yet. What history suggests is the people who will shape the outcome are those who understand the new medium well enough to use it deliberately, and who have something worth saying when they do. Those of us who have spent years learning to read the evidence carefully and argue for it honestly have a printing press in our pockets. The question is whether we use it. Well, what do you think? What does this comparison miss? Are we better or worse equipped than the people of early modern times to handle the revolution we are living through?